December 15th, 1876. The Sangre de Cristo Mountains, Colorado Territory. The wind screamed through the pines like something alive and hungry. Jacob McAllister stood motionless in the snow, his Winchester Model 1873 rifle steady against his shoulder, his breathing controlled to the rhythm he'd learned 14 years ago in a different war, on different ground. The mule deer moved through the clearing below, unaware where it was being watched. A buck, maybe 200 pounds, its tracks pressed deep into the fresh powder. 3 inches deep meant the animal was moving slow, hungry, or injured. Jacob's finger rested against the trigger guard, not on the trigger itself, not yet. Thomas Brennan had taught him that. Wait for the moment when the world goes quiet, when your heartbeat is the only sound that matters, when the shot becomes inevitable, like dawn after darkness. The buck stopped, turned its head toward the ridgeline, ears forward. Something had spooked it. Jacob held his breath. His beard was thick with ice. His hair, black and streaked with early gray, hung past his shoulders beneath a fur cap made from the pelt of a wolf he'd killed 3 winters ago. The scar that ran from his right temple down to his jaw was hidden beneath the beard, but he felt it tighten in the cold. A gift from Antietam, a reminder of the day everything changed. The buck bolted. Jacob lowered his rifle without firing. Something was wrong. Deer didn't spook without reason. Not up here, where the only predators were bears still hibernating and the occasional mountain lion that knew better than to hunt in daylight. He listened. The wind carried a sound that didn't belong, a thin metallic chime, distant but distinct. Jacob turned his head slowly, letting his eyes sweep the tree line. There, movement in the snow 30 yards upslope. Not an animal, too deliberate. He moved through the powder without sound, each footfall placed with the care of a man who'd spent 11 years learning how to disappear. The chiming grew louder, regular, like a bell. He found it half buried in a drift, a rosary. Wooden beads worn smooth by countless prayers, strung on a thin silver chain. The cross at the end was olive wood, simple and old, the kind that came from the Holy Land, the kind that meant something. Jacob crouched, studying the snow around it. Fresh tracks, a woman's boot, small, the leather thin. City shoes, not made for mountains. The stride was uneven, staggering. One print showed a smear of red, blood. He looked up the slope. The tracks led higher toward the north face where the ridge dropped away into nothing. A 300-foot fall onto rocks that would break a body into pieces too small to bury. Jacob closed his eyes for 3 seconds. He'd lived alone for 11 years because alone meant no one else could die because of him. Alone meant no orders to follow, no commanders to trust, no friends to bury. The mountains didn't judge. They didn't ask questions. They just were. But the tracks were fresh, 30 minutes old, maybe less, and they led toward death. He opened his eyes and started climbing. The voice in his head sounded like Thomas. It always did when conscience spoke. You can't save everyone, Jake, but you can save someone. Jacob followed the blood. The woman had fought for every step. He could see it in the way the tracks wandered, corrected, wandered again. She'd fallen twice. The second time, she'd stayed down for several minutes. The snow around that spot showed the imprint of her body, the desperate scrabbling of her hands as she forced herself upright. Whoever she wasn't a quitter. The tracks led to a shallow cave, more of an overhang really, where the cliff face had cracked and pulled away from itself. Jacob approached from the side, rifle ready. He'd learned not to assume. Not after the war. Not after what men did to each other when they thought God wasn't watching. She lay on her side, facing the stone wall. The white fabric covering her head was soaked with melted snow and matted with blood. A nun's veil, the dark wool of her habit, blended with the shadows, but he could see her chest rising and falling. Shallow breaths, rapid. Her right hand clutched something against her body. Her left arm lay at an angle that spoke of broken ribs. Jacob lowered his rifle and knelt at the cave's entrance. He didn't speak. Not yet. Words could frighten someone already terrified. Instead, he set down his rifle where she could see it, pulled off his gloves, and began building a small fire from the dry kindling he always carried. The scrape of flint on steel, the whisper of tinder catching, the first thread of smoke. The woman's breathing changed, faster, She'd heard him. Jacob kept his movements slow, deliberate. He fed the fire until it caught properly, then sat back on his heels, hands visible, empty. Her head turned, just an inch, enough to see him from the corner of one eye. They looked at each other for a long moment. Her eye was blue, bright blue, like Colorado sky in August, and it was full of the kind of fear that came from knowing death was close and having no strength left to run. Jacob spoke quietly, his voice rough from disuse. "You're hurt." She didn't answer, just watched him with that one blue eye, trying to decide if he was salvation or something worse. "My name is Jacob McAllister," he continued. "I found your rosary about a mile back. Followed your tracks here. The North Ridge is a quarter-mile ahead. If you'd kept going, you'd have walked off a cliff." Her eye closed. A single tear traced down through the grime on her visible cheek. "I'm going to check your injuries," Jacob said. "I won't hurt you, but if I don't, the cold will kill you before morning." He moved closer, slowly, giving her time to protest. She didn't. He reached for the veil covering her head and paused, his rough fingers an inch from the white fabric. "May I?" The smallest nod. He pulled back the veil carefully. The blood came from a gash on her scalp, above her right temple. 4 inches long, deep enough to show bone. Someone had hit her with something heavy. The edge of a gun barrel, maybe, or a rock. Her hair was dark blonde, matted with blood and sweat. Her face was young, late 20s, pale skin going gray from cold and shock. Jacob had seen enough battlefield injuries to know what would kill and what wouldn't. The head wound looked worse than it was. Scalp wounds bled like rivers, but rarely killed. It was the broken ribs that worried him. If one had punctured a lung, she'd drown in her own blood within hours. "Can you breathe deep?" he asked. She tried, gasped, shook her head. "Broken ribs. Maybe two. I need to get you somewhere warm. Can you stand?" Another head shake, this one more definite. Jacob looked outside. The sun was dropping toward the western peaks. 2 hours until full dark. The temperature would fall to 10 below, maybe colder. She wouldn't last the night in this cave, even with a fire. His cabin was 5 miles southeast. He could carry her, but not in the dark, not through snow this deep. They'd have to wait until first light, which meant keeping her alive until then. He pulled off his heavy coat, the one lined with bear fur that had kept him breathing through 3 Colorado winters, laid it over her like a blanket. She was shivering so hard her teeth clacked together. "What's your name?" Jacob asked as he added more wood to the fire. She watched him for a long moment, deciding he realized whether to trust him with the truth. "Sister Abigail," she said finally. Her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. "From the convent, Our Lady of Sorrows." Jacob nodded slowly. The convent was 50 miles east, near the New Mexico border. A woman didn't walk 50 miles through winter mountains by accident. "Who's looking for you, sister?" Her good eye widened. "How did you know?" "Nobody comes into these mountains in December unless they're running from something. And that wound on your head didn't come from a fall." She closed her eye again. When she opened it, something had changed in her expression, a kind of resignation, the look of someone who'd carried a secret too long and was too tired to carry it anymore. "My uncle," she said, "and a judge, and men they have hired to bring me back." "Back where?" "To Boston, to marry a man I've never chosen, to sign away everything my father built." Her breathing was ragged, painful. "They killed him, my father, made it look like an accident, and now they want to use me to make it legal." Jacob fed another stick to the fire. The wood popped and crackled. Outside, the wind howled through the pines like wolves calling to each other across the dark. "The habit," he said. "You're not really a nun, are you?" She flinched as if he'd struck her. "How could you possibly know that?" "Your hands, too soft, nuns work. Gardens, laundry, cooking. Their hands show it." He gestured toward the rosary he'd laid beside the fire to dry. "And you hold the beads wrong. Someone who prays the rosary every day doesn't have to think about which bead comes next. You do." A ghost of a smile touched her cracked lips. "You're very observant, Mr. McAllister." "I'm alive. That requires observation." "Then you should observe this." She struggled to sit up, gasping with pain, and reached into the folds of her habit. Her hand emerged holding a small leather envelope, water-stained and worn. These are copies of my father's real will. Proof that Victor Thornton forged documents to steal his brother's company. Proof that Judge Amos Blackwell is complicit in fraud and murder. She held the envelope toward him with a trembling hand. I've sent copies to 4 lawyers in 4 different cities. Boston, Chicago, Denver, San Francisco. If I die, if I disappear, they have instructions to publish everything in the newspapers. The New York Times, the Chicago Tribune, the Boston Globe. Jacob took the envelope, opened it carefully. Inside were legal documents, letters, ledgers showing money transferred from Victor Thornton to Judge Amos Blackwell. $50,000 over 3 years. The kind of money that bought judges, the kind of money that made murder profitable. He looked up at her. Smart. But if they catch you alive, they can force you to write letters recanting everything. Say you were confused, grief-stricken, not in your right mind. Which is why I won't let them catch me alive. The way she said it, calm and certain, made Jacob's chest tighten. This woman had already decided. She'd chosen her cliff. The only question was whether someone pushed her over or she jumped. He folded the envelope and handed it back. How long have you been running? 5 days. They attacked the convent 3 nights ago. A man named Silas Cord. He had dogs. They tracked me to the river. I crossed it, thought I'd lost them. But then I heard them again this morning. The ducks, they're close. Jacob's hand moved unconsciously to his rifle. Silas Cord, he knew that name, knew the man behind it. They'd served together. Same unit, same war, same mud and blood and screaming. Silas Cord, who'd taken Confederate silver to keep quiet about what their captain had done, who'd stood by while 23 men died because orders said to retreat and money said to stay silent. Cord works for your uncle now? Jacob asked. You know him? I knew him long time ago. Different man then, or maybe the same man, just younger. Jacob stood and moved to the cave entrance, studying the failing light. How much are they paying him? $3,000. That's what I heard Victor offer. 3,000, more than most men made in 5 years. Enough to make a man very motivated. Enough to make him very dangerous. Jacob looked back at the woman. At Sister Abigail, who wasn't really a sister. At this stranger who'd stumbled into his mountains carrying secrets that could destroy powerful men. She was watching him with both eyes now, having turned her head despite the pain it cost her. Blue eyes that held fear, yes, but also something else. Determination. The refusal to quit that he'd seen in soldiers who kept fighting after they had been shot, who crawled through mud with broken legs because staying down meant dying. He'd lived alone for 11 years. It was safer that way. Cleaner. No one to lose, no one to fail, no one to bury. But Thomas's voice was in his head again, clear as if his friend stood beside him. You can't save everyone, Jake, but you can save someone. Jacob made his decision. We leave at first light, he said. My cabin is 5 miles from here. We'll be there by noon if you can walk. If you can't, I'll carry you. Once we're there, I can defend one position better than trying to outrun dogs in open country. They'll kill you if you help me. They'll treat burn. Mr. McAllister, you don't understand. My uncle has money. He has Judge Blackwell. They can make you disappear. They can make it legal. Jacob turned back to her fully. The firelight caught the scar on his face, made it look like a crack running through stone. 14 years ago, he said, his voice low and hard, I stood on a battlefield and watched my best friend die because I followed orders instead of my conscience. A captain told me to retreat, said it was strategic, necessary. I found out later he'd been paid to pull us back, paid in Confederate gold to abandon the position. 23 men died. My friend Thomas died screaming my name, begging me to come back for him. He crouched down so they were eye level. I've spent 11 years up here alone, trying to forget that I was too much of a coward to save him. So no, ma'am, I don't understand your uncle's money or your judge's power. But I understand that if I walk away from you now, I'm still that same coward who left Thomas to die. And I'm done being that man. Silence filled the cave. Even the wind outside seemed to hold its breath. Abigail's eyes glistened with tears. The captain, who took the bribe, What was his name? Amos Blackwell. He made general after the war. Then judge. Seems betraying your men is good for a career. Her face went pale. Blackwell. The same man my uncle wants me to marry. Jacob felt something cold settle into his gut. Of course it was Blackwell. The universe had a sense of humor, like a knife in the ribs. Then we have something in common, he said quietly. We're both running from the same devil. Abigail reached out and gripped his arm with surprising strength. Jacob McAllister, will you help me fight him? I'll help you survive him. Fighting comes after. She smiled then, a real smile despite the pain and fear. That's all I'm asking. Jacob nodded and turned back to tend the fire. Behind him, Abigail finally let herself relax, let the exhaustion take her towards sleep. But before she drifted off, she whispered something so quiet he almost missed it. Thank you for being brave enough to be a coward. He didn't answer, just kept feeding the fire, keeping the darkness back, and tried not to think about the ducks that would come with the dawn. The night crawled by with the speed of a dying man's last breath. Jacob stayed awake, feeding the fire, listening to the wind and the silence beneath it. The kind of silence that meant something was moving out there. Something that didn't want to be heard. Abigail slept fitfully, crying out once in a language he didn't recognize. Latin, maybe. The prayers of someone who'd spent time in convents, even if she wasn't truly called to the life. Her breathing was rough but steady. The ribs weren't puncturing anything vital. Not yet. At one point, near midnight by his reckoning, she woke with a gasp, disoriented, frightened. Jacob spoke quietly without moving, letting his voice anchor her. You're safe. Still in the cave. I'm still here. She found him in the firelight, stared at him for a long moment, as if memorizing his face. You could have left me, she said, taken the documents, sold them to the highest bidder. $3,000 is a lot of money. I don't need money. Everyone needs money. I need to be able to look at myself in a mirror. Money doesn't help with that. She smiled just a little. My father used to say the same thing. He was a good man, honorable. It got him killed. Being good doesn't keep you safe, Jacob agreed, but being bad doesn't let you sleep. Do you sleep, Mr. McAllister? No. Good, neither do I. At least we'll have company in our nightmares. She closed her eyes again, and this time when sleep took her, it held longer. Jacob watched the entrance to the cave. The sky beyond was clear now, stars scattered like broken glass across black velvet. The storm had passed. Tomorrow would be cold and bright, good weather for hunting, or being hunted. He thought about Silas Cord. They'd been close once, brothers in everything but blood. Silas had saved his life during the siege of Vicksburg. Jacob had returned the favor at Chattanooga. They'd made promises about after the war, about going west together, starting fresh, leaving the blood behind. But then came Antietam, and Captain Blackwell's order to retreat, and Thomas Brennan's screams, and Silas standing there, quiet, watching as they marched away. Jacob had seen it in his friend's eyes even then. The guilt, the knowledge. Silas had known about Blackwell's deal. He'd known and said nothing. They'd split up after the war without speaking of it. Some betrayals were too deep for words. And now Silas was coming up the mountain with dogs and guns and 3,000 reasons to finish what Blackwell had started. Jacob checked his rifle for the 100th time. 15 rounds in the tube, 1 in the chamber. His Colt Peacemaker held 6. He had a Bowie knife with a 12-inch blade, bone handle, sharpened until it could split a hair. And he had the mountain itself. 11 years of learning every trail, every hiding spot, every place where the snow hid deadly drops. It would have to be enough. At dawn, gray light filtered into the cave like smoke. Jacob woke Abigail gently. She groaned, tried to sit up, gasped at the pain in her ribs. He helped her, supporting her weight without making her feel helpless. Pride mattered, even when you were broken. Can you walk? He asked. She tested her legs, stood, swayed, caught herself against the cave wall. Yes, slowly. Slow is fine, quiet is better. He gave her his coat again, helped her into it, though it swallowed her small frame, wrapped the veil around her head to protect against frostbite, checked her boots. They were thin leather, nearly worn through. He had nothing better to give her. Stay close behind me, he said. Step where I step. If I stop, you stop. If I drop, you drop. Understand? She nodded. They left the cave as the sun broke over the eastern peaks, turning the snow into fields of diamond. The cold bit deep, 15 below by Jacob's estimate. Their breath came in white clouds. Every sound seemed to carry for miles. They'd gone maybe half a mile when Jacob heard them. Dogs, distant but distinct. The deep baying of bloodhounds on a scent, coming from the west. He stopped, held up his hand. Abigail froze behind him. The dogs were moving fast, too fast. They'd picked up the trail. Jacob studied the terrain. They were on a game path that wound along the ridge. To the south, the ground dropped away steeply into a ravine filled with deadfall and boulders. To the north, the forest thickened. More cover, but harder going. East was his cabin, still 4 miles away. Too far to run. He made a decision and turned to Abigail. Change of plans. We're not going to outrun them. We're going to lose them. How? Water. Dogs can't track through running water. There's a creek about a mile east, feeds down from the high country. We cross it, the scent breaks. But I heard them, they're close. Which means we move now. He started forward at a faster pace, still careful, but pushing. Abigail kept up, teeth gritted against the pain. The sound of the dogs grew louder. A man's voice called out, faint but clear. Silas. Jacob recognized the cadence even if he couldn't make out the words. The creek appeared through the trees, a black ribbon of fast water cutting through white snow. Steam rose from its surface. The water would be just above freezing, cold enough to kill in minutes if you stayed in too long. Jacob turned to Abigail. We're going through it. Current's strong here. I'll go first. Find the footing. You follow in my steps exactly. Don't let go of my hand. She looked at the water, at the ice forming along the edges, and nodded. No fear in her eyes now, just determination. Jacob stepped into the creek. The cold hit like a physical blow. His legs went numb almost instantly. The rocks beneath his feet were slick, treacherous. He found his balance, turned back, extended his hand. Abigail took it. Her grip was surprisingly strong. They crossed together step by careful step. The current tried to sweep them downstream. The cold tried to lock their muscles. But they fought it, inch by inch, until Jacob's boot found the far bank and he hauled them both out. They stood there dripping, shaking, knowing they had maybe 5 minutes before hypothermia became a problem. Run, Jacob said. They ran. The cabin appeared like a miracle through the trees. Small, solid, built from pine logs Jacob had cut himself. Smoke rose from the chimney. He'd left the fire banked when he went hunting. Thank God for small mercies. They crashed through the door, and Jacob slammed it behind them, dropped the bar, moved immediately to the fire and built it up. Abigail stood in the center of the room, dripping and shaking so hard she could barely stand. Strip off anything wet, Jacob ordered, turning his back to give her privacy. There's a blanket on the bed. Wrap up in it. I need to get you warm. He heard her moving, the rustle of wet fabric. After a moment, her voice, small and embarrassed. I'm decent. He turned. She'd wrapped herself in his bearskin blanket, her wet hair plastered to her skull. She looked like a half-drowned kitten, fierce and fragile at the same time. Jacob spread her wet clothes near the fire, then grabbed more blankets and wrapped them around her. She was still shaking. Sit, he said, guiding her to the chair nearest the fire. Don't try to warm up too fast, slow and steady. She nodded, teeth chattering too hard for speech. Jacob moved to the window, studied the forest beyond. No sign of pursuit yet, but they'd come. He'd given them a puzzle with the creek crossing, but Silas was good. He'd figure it out. Maybe not today, but soon. Behind him, Abigail finally managed to speak. That man, the one chasing us, you know him well? I thought I did. War changes people. Or maybe it just reveals what was always there. You think he'll find us? Yes. And then? Jacob turned from the window. The firelight cast deep shadows across his scarred face. Then I'll do what I should have done 14 years ago. I'll stand my ground. Outside, the forest was silent. But in that silence, Jacob could feel them coming. The ducks. The men. The past that had finally caught up to him. He checked his rifle one more time and waited for the knock on the door he knew would come. It came as the sun reached its apex, weak winter light filtering through the windows. Not a knock, but a voice. Loud. Carrying. Jacob McAllister. I know you're in there. Silas Cord. Jacob moved to the window, staying to the side where he couldn't be seen. Outside, 6 men stood in the snow. Silas in front, older now, broader, his face hidden beneath a beard and fur hat. 5 others behind him, hard men with the look of those who killed for money and slept fine after. 3 bloodhounds sat in the snow, panting, their breath clouding. Jacob caught Abigail's eye, gestured toward the bedroom. She nodded and moved quickly, quietly, staying low. Then he opened the door but didn't step out. Kept the Winchester in his left hand, barrel pointing down but ready to swing up. Silas, he said, his voice flat, giving nothing. Cord smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. 11 years, Jake. They said you'd gone wild. Feral. They said the man I knew was dead. He is. Then you won't mind if we search your place, looking for someone. A woman, sick in the head, family wants her back safe. Haven't seen anyone, just me in the mountain. Silas took a step forward. The dogs whined, straining against their leads. See, that's interesting, because these dogs say different. They followed her scent right to your creek, lost it at the water but picked it up again on this side. Led us straight here. Dogs make mistakes. Not these dogs. These dogs tracked a killer through 50 miles of swamp last year. Found him in 3 days. Never been wrong. Jacob said nothing, just stood there, hand loose on his rifle. Silas's smile faded. I don't want trouble with you, Jake. We were brothers once. We bled together. But this job pays $3,000. That's a lot of money to leave on the table for the sake of old times. I remember Antietam, Silas. I remember you standing there while Thomas died, while you pocketed Blackwell's money and kept your mouth shut. Don't talk to me about brothers. The words hit like thrown stones. Silas's face hardened. You don't know what you're talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about. And if you take one more step toward this cabin, you'll find out how much I remember. For a long moment, nobody moved. The dogs whined, the wind blew. 6 men with guns faced 1 man in a doorway, and the mountain held its breath. Then Silas smiled again. Cold. Flat. All right, Jake, you want to play it that way, that's fine. But I'll be back, with more men, with warrants, with Judge Amos Blackwell himself if I have to. And when I come back, it won't be a conversation. He turned and whistled to his men. They mounted their horses, the dogs on leads, and rode back down the mountain. Jacob watched them go until they disappeared into the trees. Then he closed the door, dropped the bar, and leaned against the wood. Abigail emerged from the bedroom, still wrapped in blankets. Will he really come back? Yes. Then we need to leave. No, I can't defend you in the open, but I can defend this cabin. I've prepared for this. I've got supplies, ammunition, knowledge of the terrain. Let them come. When they do, I'll be ready. He moved to the wall and pulled down a map he'd drawn over years of exploration. Showed her the terrain, the approaches, the places where men could hide or be ambushed. His voice was calm, methodical, the voice of a soldier planning a defense. Abigail watched him with those blue eyes. Finally, she spoke. Why are you doing this? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Jacob stopped, looked at the map, at his hands, at the ghosts that lived in this cabin with him. I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for Thomas. For every man who died because I followed orders instead of my conscience. For every night I've spent up here alone, wondering if I'm a coward or just a survivor. He turned to face her. I can't bring Thomas back. I can't save those 23 men. But I can save you, and maybe that's enough. Maybe that's how you stop being a coward. One choice at a time. Abigail stood, crossed the room, and placed her hand on his arm. Her touch was light but steady. You're not a coward, Jacob McAllister. You're the first truly brave man I've met. Outside, the sun began its descent toward the western peaks. Night was coming, and with it, the long wait until Silas Cord kept his promise. Jacob McAllister stood at his window, rifle in hand, and prepared to finally stand his ground. The story was just beginning. The morning came hard and cold. the kind of December dawn that turned breath to ice crystals and made steel burn to touch. Jacob stood at the window watching the eastern sky bleed pink and gold across the Sangre de Cristo peaks. He hadn't slept. Behind him, Abigail lay curled beneath blankets on his bed, her breathing steady now, the fever from her wounds finally broken. 5 days had passed since Silas Cord rode down the mountain with his promise hanging in the air like a noose. 5 days of waiting. 5 days of teaching Abigail how to load a rifle, how to read the forest for danger, how to move quietly through snow. She learned quickly, this woman who wasn't really a nun. Her hands, soft when he'd found her, were developing calluses from splitting kindling and working leather into snowshoes. But the waiting was ending. Jacob could feel it in his bones, in the way the forest had gone too quiet, in the raven that circled overhead yesterday and hadn't returned. Something was coming. He was checking the breech on his Winchester when he heard it. Hoofbeats. A single horse moving fast. Jacob moved to the door, rifle ready. Through the window, he could see a rider emerging from the tree line. Young, thin, riding hard like something chased him. The boy pulled up 20 yards from the cabin and dismounted. Couldn't be more than 16. Dark hair, wearing clothes meant for city streets, not mountain winters. He carried a pack that looked too heavy for his frame. "Mr. McAllister?" the boy called out, his voice cracked with youth and exhaustion. "Jacob McAllister?" Jacob opened the door but stayed in the frame. "Who's asking?" The boy took 2 steps forward and stopped. His face was pale, pinched with cold and something else. Fear, or grief, or both. "My name is Thomas Brennan, Jr. You knew my father." The world tilted. Jacob felt the rifle slip in his grip, caught it before it fell. Thomas. This boy was Thomas's son. He could see it now, in the shape of the jaw, the set of the eyes. The same eyes that had looked at him from a battlefield 14 years ago and begged him to come back. "Your father died at Antietam," Jacob said, his voice rough. "I know. September 17th, 1862. I was 2 years old. I don't remember him." The boy's chin lifted, pride fighting through fear. "But I know he died asking for you, and I know you couldn't save him." The words should have been an accusation. Instead, they sounded like an absolution. Jacob stepped out of the cabin. "How did you find me?" "My uncle. He told me you'd gone into the mountains. I've been asking in every town from Denver to here. Finally, someone in Silver Creek said there was a man living up this way. A man they called Iron Jake. Said he'd been a soldier once." "Why come looking?" Tom Jr. shifted his weight, the pack pulling at his shoulders. "Because I'm 16. Because my uncle says it's time I learned to be a man. Because I read my father's letters from the war, and every one of them talked about Jacob McAllister. About how you saved his life at Vicksburg, how you taught him to track, how you were the best man he ever knew." The boy's voice broke. "And I thought maybe if I could find you, you could teach me. The things my father would have taught me if he'd lived. How to survive, how to be brave, how to be someone worth remembering." Behind Jacob, the cabin door opened. Abigail appeared, wrapped in one of his coats, her hair tied back. She looked at the barman, then at Jacob, understanding blooming across her face. "This is Thomas's son," Jacob said quietly. "Tom Jr." She stepped forward, her hand extended. "I'm Abigail Thornton. I'm sorry about your father." Tom shook her hand, confusion flickering across his features. A woman in a mountain man's cabin wasn't what he had expected. Jacob made a decision. He'd spent 11 years running from Thomas's memory. Maybe it was time to stop running. Maybe teaching Thomas's son was another kind of redemption. "Come inside," he said. "You're half frozen. We'll talk about your father, about what he'd want you to know." Tom's face lit up like sunrise. He grabbed his pack and followed them into the cabin. Over coffee and dried venison, Jacob told stories. About Thomas Brennan, who joined the Union Army at 17 because he believed in something bigger than himself. Who'd sung Irish songs to keep the men's spirits up during long marches. Who'd taken a Confederate bullet meant for Jacob at Vicksburg and kept fighting with blood running down his arm. Tom listened with hunger, soaking up every word like a man dying of thirst. Abigail listened too, and Jacob saw her watching him differently now. Seeing past the scar in the silence to the man who'd loved a friend enough to grieve him for 11 years. Your father made me promise something, Jacob said finally. The night before Antietam. He said if anything happened to him, I should look after you and your mother. Make sure you grew up right. My mother died when I was 2, same month as my father. My uncle said it was grief that killed her. Jacob closed his eyes. He'd failed them both. Failed Thomas, failed his wife, failed this boy who'd grown up without either parent. Then I'm 11 years late, he said, opening his eyes. But if you want to learn what your father would have taught you, I'll teach it. How to track, how to hunt, how to survive when the world turns cold. Tom's eyes shone with tears he refused to let fall. Thank you, sir. I won't waste your time. I'll work hard. I'll do whatever you ask. First thing you'll do is stop calling me sir. Your father never did. Call me Jake, or when he was feeling formal, McAllister. You can do the same. Yes, sir. I mean, yes, Jake. Abigail smiled, the first real smile Jacob had seen from her. Looks like this cabin just got more crowded. She was right. And for the first time in 11 years, Jacob found he didn't mind the company. The lesson started that afternoon. Jacob took Tom into the forest and showed him how to read tracks in the snow. Deer, elk, mountain lion, bear. How to tell fresh prints from old, male from female, healthy from injured. Your father learned this from a Pawnee scout named Gray Wolf, Jacob said, kneeling beside a set of elk tracks. He taught us both. Said white men walk through the forest blind, seeing trees but missing the story written in every footprint and broken branch. Tom knelt beside him, studying the tracks. How old are these? What do you see? The edges are sharp, no frost on them, and there's water still in the bottom of the deepest prints. Good, what does that tell you? Made this morning, maybe 2 hours ago. Closer to 1. See how the disturbed snow hasn't settled yet? This elk walked through here while we were drinking coffee. Big male, mature, 300 pounds at least. Moving steady, not spooked, probably heading to the meadow below the North Ridge where the grass still shows through the snow. Tom's face was intense with concentration. My father really learned this? He learned it better than me. Had a natural gift for it. Could tell you what a deer had eaten for breakfast by studying its droppings. That's disgusting. That's survival. Up here, knowing what animals eat and where they go means knowing where to hunt. Knowing where to hunt means not starving. They spent 3 hours in the forest. Tom absorbed everything like paper soaking up ink. He had his father's quick mind, his ability to see patterns. By the time they returned to the cabin, he could identify 4 different animal tracks and knew the basics of reading weather, signs, and cloud formations. Abigail had kept the fire going and made a stew from the supplies Jacob kept stored. They ate together as darkness fell, 3 people thrown together by circumstance, beginning to feel like something more than strangers. After dinner, Tom pulled out a notebook and began sketching the tracks he'd seen, labeling them carefully. Jacob watched him work and felt something ease in his chest. A weight he'd carried for so long, he'd forgotten it was there. Your father kept notebooks too, he said. Drew pictures of birds he saw, plants he didn't recognize. Said if he survived the war, he wanted to be a school teacher. Teach children about the natural world. Tom looked up. I didn't know that. He was good at drawing. Better than me. Better than most men I've known. He could have been an artist if he'd wanted. Do you think he was scared when he died? The question hung in the air like smoke. Jacob met the boy's eyes and decided he deserved truth, not comfort. Yes, he was terrified. We all were. But fear doesn't make you a coward. Running from your brothers when they need you, that makes you a coward. And your father never ran, not once, not even at the end. But you did. You followed the order to retreat. It wasn't an accusation, just a statement of fact, and somehow that made it worse. Yes, Jacob said. I did, and I've lived with that choice every day since. Tom nodded slowly. My uncle said soldiers who follow orders can't be blamed for what happens. He said you did your duty. Your uncle is wrong. There's duty, and then there's what's right. Sometimes they're the same. Sometimes they're not. Learning to tell the difference, that's what makes a man worth following. Abigail spoke quietly from her chair by the fire. And sometimes the people giving orders are the ones who should be questioned, like Judge Amos Blackwell. Tom's head whipped around. Blackwell, the judge from Boston? You know him? Abigail asked. Know of him. He's famous in Boston. War hero, decorated general. He's running for territorial governor if Colorado becomes a state. Jacob and Abigail exchanged glances. Of course, Blackwell was climbing higher. Men like him always did. Betrayal and ambition were first cousins. That man, Jacob said carefully, is the captain who ordered the retreat at Antietam. The man who took Confederate gold to abandon his position. The man who got your father killed. Tom went pale. That can't be true. He's a judge. He has medals. Having medals doesn't make you honorable. It just means you survived long enough for someone to give you a piece of metal. Jacob leaned forward. Tom, I need you to understand something. The world is full of men who look noble but act corrupt, who wear the right clothes and say the right words but serve only themselves. Your father saw through men like that. He called them hollow, pretty on the outside, empty where it counts. Tom stared at his notebook, his young face struggling with the collision between what he'd been taught to believe and what he was being told was true. Abigail broke the silence. Judge Blackwell is also the man my uncle wants me to marry, the man who's complicit in my father's murder. And if Silas Cord comes back, it will be on Blackwell's orders. That's when they heard it. Dogs baying in the distance, coming from the southwest, multiple animals moving fast. Jacob was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. He moved to the window and pulled back the curtain an inch. Torchlight flickered through the trees. Half a mile away, maybe less. A lot of torches, more than 6 men this time. They're back, he said quietly. Tom, get away from the window. Abigail, the cellar, now. No, Abigail said. She stood, her jaw set. I'm tired of hiding. If they want me, let them come. If they take you, everything you've fought for ends. The lawyers don't matter if you sign papers saying you were confused, grief-stricken. Not in your right mind, and Victor will make you sign. Trust me on that. She wanted to argue. He could see it in her eyes, but she was also practical. She nodded and moved toward the trap door hidden beneath the bearskin rug. Tom started to follow her. Jacob caught his arm. Not you. You stay with me. But I don't know how to fight. Then you're about to learn. Get your father's rifle from your pack. Load it like I showed you. And whatever happens, whatever you see, you stay low and you don't fire unless I tell you to. The boy nodded, fear and excitement warring across his face. He retrieved his rifle, an old Springfield that had seen better days, and began loading it with shaking hands. Jacob moved to the door and waited. The voices grew louder, multiple men arguing about something. Then footsteps on the porch, heavy, confident, a knock, not gentle. The kind of knock that expected compliance. Jacob opened the door. 10 men stood in his yard, Silas Cord in front, looking grim. Behind him, faces Jacob didn't recognize. Hard men, professional killers, not frontier trackers. And beside Silas, 2 men in expensive coats that had no business being on a mountain in winter. The older one spoke first, silver-haired, well-fed, with the soft hands of someone who'd never done physical labor. Mr. McAllister, my name is Victor Thornton. I believe you're harboring my niece. Don't know any niece of yours. Don't play games. Silas tracked her here 5 days ago. Those dogs don't lie. Dogs can be wrong. The second well-dressed man stepped forward, older than Victor, with the bearing of someone used to being obeyed. His eyes were cold, calculating. When he spoke, his voice carried authority like a weapon. Mr. McAllister, I am Judge Amos Blackwell. I have legal authority to search this property for Abigail Thornton, who has been declared mentally incompetent and is under the guardianship of her uncle. Step aside. Jacob looked at this man who'd killed Thomas, who'd taken Confederate gold and called it strategy, who'd climbed to power on the bones of men who trusted him. I know who you are, Judge. We've met before, Antietam, September 1862. You were Captain Blackwell then. You ordered us to retreat while Thomas Brennan and 22 other men died because you'd been paid to pull back. Blackwell's face went hard. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do. And I think if anyone here is mentally incompetent, it's the man who betrayed his country for silver. Victor stepped forward. This is absurd. Judge Blackwell is a decorated war hero. Decorated by who? The same people who paid him? Jacob shifted his rifle slightly, not quite pointing it at anyone, not yet. Miss Thornton has sent documents to 4 lawyers in 4 cities: Boston, Chicago, Denver, San Francisco. They detail your brother's real will. They show money transfers from you to the judge. They prove fraud and murder. And if she dies or disappears, those documents go to every major newspaper in the country. Victor's face went white. You're bluffing. Am I? You willing to bet your freedom on that? Behind the 2 men, Silas Cord spoke up. His voice was tight, conflicted. Jake, listen. I know what you think you know about Antietam, but it's not that simple. Isn't it? You took Blackwell's money. You stayed quiet while Thomas died. Seems pretty simple to me. You don't understand. You think I wanted to keep quiet? You think I didn't want to tell the truth? I think you chose money over honor. That's all I need to understand. Silas's hands clenched into fists. Behind him, one of the hired men rested his hand on his gun. The tension ratcheted higher. Judge Blackwell raised his voice. Mr. McAllister, you are obstructing justice. I can have you arrested. I can have this cabin burned. I can make your life very difficult. You can try and... From inside the cabin, Tom's young voice rang out, clear and strong. And you'll have to go through me first. Because Jacob McAllister is the man my father trusted more than anyone. And if he says you're a coward and a traitor, Judge Blackwell, then I believe him. Everyone turned. Tom stood in the doorway, his father's rifle in his hands, pointed at the ground but ready. His face was pale, but his hands were steady. Blackwell's eyes narrowed. Who are you, boy? Thomas Brennan, Jr. You ordered the retreat that killed my father. That makes you a murderer in my book. For a moment, Jacob thought Blackwell would explode. The man's face turned purple with rage, but he controlled it, forced his voice back to judicial calm. The accusations of children and mountain hermits mean nothing to the law. Silas, search the cabin. If she's here, bring her out. Use force if necessary. Silas looked at Jacob. Something passed between them. Memory, shared history, the ghost of friendship. Then Silas shook his head. No. What? Victor sputtered. You're working for me. I'm paying you $3,000. Keep your money. I'm done. Silas turned to face Victor and Blackwell fully. Jake's right. I did take money to stay quiet about Antietam. Blackwell threatened my sister. Said if I talked, she'd have an accident. She was 16, living in Boston. I was 20, scared. So I took his silver and I kept my mouth shut while good men died. He pulled a small leather journal from his coat. But I kept records, every payment, every threat, every name of every man who helped Blackwell betray the Union. It's all here, and Jake's not the only one who's been carrying guilt for 11 years. Jacob stared at his old friend, seeing him clearly for the first time since the war. Not the traitor he'd imagined, but a man who'd been trapped between loyalty and terror, who'd made the wrong choice and lived with it. Why now? Jacob asked quietly. Because my sister died last year. Cancer. And I don't have anyone left to protect. And because I'm tired of being the man who let Thomas die. Silas looked at Tom. Your father was a good man, son. Better than me, better than most. He deserved better than what he got. Victor lunged for the journal. Silas sidestepped easily and tossed it to Jacob. Keep it safe, make sure it gets to the right people. One of the hired men drew his gun. Silas spun and backhanded him across the face. The man went down hard. Anyone else? Silas asked, his voice deadly calm. No one moved. Blackwell's face had gone from purple to white. You're finished, Cord. I'll see you hang. You're welcome to try. But first you'll have to explain to a court why you paid me $10,000 over 12 years to keep quiet. Why you ordered men to so you could profit. Why you murdered an innocent woman in Afghanistan during your time as a military advisor. Oh yes, Jake. I know about that too. About Amira. About how you told Jake to abandon her because you'd been paid to let the Taliban keep that village. Jacob's blood went cold. What? Silas looked at him with something like pity. You didn't know. Blackwell brokered a deal, an American contractor, wanted the land Amira's family owned. Taliban controlled the area. Blackwell arranged for us to pull out, leave the villagers to their fate, in exchange for mineral rights after the Taliban executed the families. The world tilted. Jacob had spent 11 years thinking he'd failed Amira because he was a coward. But he'd been set up. They'd all been set up. Blackwell hadn't just been corrupt. He'd been evil. "You're lying," Blackwell said, but his voice shook. "I have documents. I have recordings. I have everything." Silas smiled, cold and bitter. "You made one mistake, Judge. You trusted me to stay bought, but you can't buy a man twice. And after my sister died, I started collecting evidence. Everything, every deal, every betrayal, every murder you have committed or commissioned." He turned to Jacob. "I came here to capture Abigail Thornton. Victor paid me $3,000, but I'm not that man anymore. And I think maybe it's time we stopped running from what we did and started making it right." Victor pulled a gun, small, a Derringer, the kind cowards carried. He pointed it at Silas. Jacob's rifle came up. "Put it down, Thornton. You're all in this together, conspiring against me, against the judge. We'll have you all arrested." "For what? Telling the truth?" That's when Abigail emerged from the cellar. She climbed up through the trapdoor, still wrapped in Jacob's coat, her blonde hair catching the light from the torches outside. In her hands she carried the leather envelope, the one with her father's will, the proof of Victor's fraud. "Hello, Uncle," she said quietly. "Did you miss me?" Victor's gun swung toward her. Jacob fired. The bullet hit Victor's hand, sent the Derringer spinning into the snow. Victor screamed and collapsed, clutching his bleeding fingers. Judge Blackwell turned and ran. Just turned and ran into the forest like a man who knew his kingdom was crumbling. Two of the hired men followed him. The rest stood frozen, uncertain whether to fight or flee. Silas made the decision for them. "Anyone who wants to leave, leave now. Anyone who stays gets to explain to the territorial marshal why they were helping a judge commit murder." The hired men fled. That left Jacob, Abigail, Tom, and Silas standing in the snow with Victor Thornton bleeding and whimpering at their feet. "We need to get him to town," Abigail said, looking at her uncle without pity. "Silver Creek has a doctor and a jail." "And a marshal," Silas added. "I'll ride with you. Tell my story. Hand over my journals. Clear all our names." Jacob lowered his rifle. "What about Blackwell? He won't get far. Not in this country. Not in winter. And even if he does, the evidence will catch up to him. Men like that always fall eventually." Tom spoke up, his voice still shaky with adrenaline. "Did my father know about the corruption?" "He suspected," Silas said. "He confronted Blackwell the night before Antietam. Said he was going to report him after the battle. That's why Blackwell ordered the retreat when he did. It was supposed to get your father killed. It worked." Tom's face crumpled, then hardened, the transformation from boy to man happening in real time. "Then I'm coming to town too. I want to testify. I want everyone to know what my father died trying to stop." Jacob looked at this boy, Thomas's son, standing tall despite his fear, saw his friend in the set of his shoulders, the determination in his eyes. "Your father would be proud," he said. They bound Victor's wounded hand and put him on a horse. Silas took the lead rope. Tom rode beside him, straight-backed and serious. Abigail rode with Jacob, her arms around his waist, her head resting against his back. As they descended the mountain toward Silver Creek, dawn began to break over the peaks, pink and gold and purple, painting the snow in colors that looked like hope. Behind them, the cabin stood empty, but Jacob knew he'd return. For the first time in 11 years, the mountains didn't feel like exile. They felt like home, and he finally had a reason to believe that redemption wasn't just a dream. It was something you could build, one hard choice at a time, one truth told after years of silence. Thomas Brennan's son rode beside him. The woman he'd saved rode with him, and the friend he'd thought lost forever rode ahead, leading them toward justice. The past wasn't erased. It never would be, but maybe, just maybe, it could be redeemed. The story wasn't over, but the ending had finally started to look like something worth fighting for. The town of Silver Creek sat in a valley like a collection of children's toys, scattered by careless hands. 24 buildings lined into muddy Main Street, most of them wood that had weathered to gray. Smoke rose from chimneys into a sky the color of old pewter. The air smelled of coal fires and horse manure, and the sharp metallic tang that came from the silver mine on the hill above town. Jacob rode at the front of their small column, his Winchester across his saddle, his eyes reading every window and doorway. Behind him, Abigail sat her borrowed horse with the rigid posture of someone unused to riding. Tom Jr. rode with the intense focus of youth, his father's rifle close at hand. Silas Cord brought up the rear, leading Victor Thornton's horse. Victor slumped in his saddle, his wounded hand wrapped in cloth already soaked through with blood. They entered town at noon. People stopped what they were doing to stare. A mountain man who hadn't been seen in 11 years. A woman in men's clothes riding astride. A boy, too young for the hard look in his eyes. A bleeding man being led like a prisoner. And Silas Cord, known in these parts as a man who worked for whoever paid best, riding with them instead of against them. The whispers started before they'd gone 50 yards. The sheriff's office sat halfway down Main Street, a squat building with bars on the windows and a sign that read, Territorial Marshal, Colorado District 7. Jacob pulled up in front and dismounted. His legs were stiff from the ride. 11 years in the mountains made him forget how much he hated towns. Too many people, too much noise, too many places for trouble to hide. The door opened before he could knock. A man stepped out, gray-haired and solid, wearing a star pinned to a wool vest. His face was weathered like old leather, carved with lines that spoke of hard years and harder choices. When he saw Jacob, he stopped dead. Jacob McAllister, the marshal said. His voice carried the flat tones of the Midwest. Heard you died up on that mountain. Heard wrong, Levi. Marshal Levi Hawkins studied Jacob for a long moment. Then his eyes moved to the others. To Abigail, to Tom, to Silas, finally to Victor bleeding on his horse. His hand moved unconsciously toward the gun at his hip. What's this about, Jake? Murder? Fraud? Treason? Take your pick. Jacob gestured to Victor. This man killed his brother and tried to steal his fortune. The woman there is the rightful heir. She has proof. And before you ask, yes, I shot him. Self-defense. He pulled on Silas here. Hawkins's eyes narrowed. Silas Cord doesn't need defending. Man can take care of himself. Not this time, Silas said quietly. He dismounted and pulled the leather journal from his coat. Marshal, I need to make a confession about things that happened during the war. About Captain Amos Blackwell. About bribes and deaths and betrayals that have been covered up for 14 years. At the mention of Blackwell's name, Hawkins went very still. You got proof? Everything, names, dates, amounts, witnesses, and it all leads back to Blackwell. Silas paused, including the retreated Antietam that killed Thomas Brennan and 22 other men, including the deal that got a woman named Amira killed in Afghanistan, including the conspiracy to defraud Abigail Thornton of her inheritance. Hawkins closed his eyes. When he opened them, something had changed in his face. The hard shell cracked just enough to show the man beneath. Thomas Brennan. I knew that name would come back to haunt us. Jacob stepped closer. You knew about Blackwell. I suspected. I was there, Jake, at Antietam. I was Lieutenant Hawkins then, serving under Captain Blackwell. I saw him take meetings with men who had no business being near a battlefield. I saw money change hands. I saw him give the order to retreat when we should have held, and I saw Thomas die because of it. Why didn't you say anything? Because I was 23 years old and scared. Because Blackwell had friends in Washington. Because I told myself I was wrong, that I must have misunderstood, that a decorated officer wouldn't betray his own men. Hawkins's voice went rough. Because I've been living with that cowardice for 14 years. The street around them had gone quiet. People were gathering, drawn by the drama unfolding in front of the marshal's office. Jacob recognized some faces from 11 years ago. Ruth Hennigan, who ran the mercantile, old Ezekiel Blackwood, the blacksmith, miners and shopkeepers, and farmers who'd come to town for supplies. A crowd was forming. Good. Let them hear this. Marshal, Abigail said, dismounting with grace despite her inexperience. My name is Abigail Thornton. This man is my Uncle Victor. 6 months ago, he murdered my father, Captain Marcus Thornton of St. Louis. He forged documents to steal my inheritance. He arranged a forced marriage to Judge Amos Blackwell to legitimize his theft. And when I ran, he hired men to bring me back dead or alive. She pulled out her leather envelope. I have proof, my father's real will, evidence of the forgery, ledgers showing payments from my uncle to Judge Blackwell. And I've sent copies to lawyers in 4 cities. If I disappear, the truth goes public. New York Times, Boston Globe, Chicago Tribune. Every newspaper in America will know what these men did. Victor, still mounted, his face pale with pain and fear, finally spoke. She's insane. She's been declared incompetent. Judge Blackwell has the legal papers. Judge Blackwell, Abigail said coldly, is a murderer and a traitor, and his papers are worth exactly nothing. A woman's voice cut through the murmurs. Let her speak. Let's hear what she has to say. Ruth Hennigan pushed through the crowd. She was 45, strong-shouldered from years of hard work, her gray-streaked hair pulled back in a practical bun. She looked at Abigail with the shrewd assessment of someone who'd seen plenty of liars and could spot truth when it appeared. I know Victor Thornton, Ruth said to the crowd. Knew him when he tried to buy silver claims from my husband 5 years back. Offered half what they were worth. When my husband refused, those claims mysteriously got contested in court. Judge Blackwell presiding. My husband lost everything. She turned to Victor. My husband died in that mine because he had to keep working after you stole his claims. Died because the equipment was old and dangerous and he couldn't afford new. So if this girl says you're a thief and a murderer, I believe her. Others in the crowd nodded, murmured agreement. Silver Creek was a small town where everyone knew everyone's business, and it seemed Victor Thornton had made enemies. An old man stepped forward, leaning on a cane made from twisted oak. Ezekiel Blackwood, 72 years old, white-haired, with eyes still sharp as broken glass. The blacksmith who'd shod horses for the Union Army during the war, who'd seen men like Blackwell rise on the backs of the dead. I served in the Mexican War, Zeke said, his voice carrying despite his age. Learned something about officers then. Learned to tell the good ones from the bad ones. Good officers eat last, sleep last, die first. Bad officers eat first, sleep first, send their men to while they watch from safe positions. He pointed at Victor with his cane. This man has the look of someone who's never risked anything for anyone. And if he's working with Amos Blackwell, then he's as rotten as they come. Because I knew Blackwell during the war, served under him briefly before I was discharged, and I saw him for what he was. A man who cared more about promotion than people. The crowd was growing, 30 people now, 40. The whole town seemed to be emerging from shops and houses, drawn by the spectacle and the chance to witness something that mattered. In a place like Silver Creek, where life was hard and entertainment scarce, a public accusation of murder was theater and justice combined. Marshal Hawkins held up his hand. All right, everybody calm down. This isn't a lynching. This is a legal matter. I'll take statements from everyone. Look at the evidence. Then I'll decide what charges to file. No, Zeke said flatly. We deserve to hear it all, right now, public testimony. You want this town to trust you, Levi Hawkins. Then you let us hear the truth in the open where it can't be buried. The crowd roared approval. Hawkins looked overwhelmed, uncertain. Jacob understood. The marshal was a good man trying to do right in a system designed to favor men like Blackwell. But the crowd had spoken. And in the territories where law was still being written in blood and honor, the people's voice carried weight that courts couldn't match. Town meeting, Hawkins said finally. St. Michael's Church, 1 hour. Anyone who wants to testify can speak. Anyone who wants to listen can hear. And whatever we decide, that's what stands. The crowd dispersed with the buzzing energy of people who sensed history being made. Jacob helped Abigail down from her horse. She was trembling, whether from cold or nerves he couldn't tell. You sure about this? He asked quietly. Once you speak publicly, there's no taking it back. I've been running for 6 months, hiding, afraid. I'm done with that. If I'm going to fight, I'll fight in the open where everyone can see. Tom joined them, his young face set with determination. I'll testify, too, about my father, about what Blackwell did. You don't have to, Jacob said. This isn't your fight. Yes, it is. My father died trying to expose Blackwell. I'll finish what he started. Jacob looked at this boy who was becoming a man before his eyes. Saw Thomas and him so strongly it hurt. Pride and grief mixed together until he couldn't separate them. Your father would be proud, he said. Silas approached, leading Victor. Marshall wants me to lock him up until the meeting. You want to come? Make sure I don't do anything stupid? Jacob nodded. They walked Victor into the marshal's office. Hawkins cleaned and bandaged the wounded hand, then locked Victor in one of the two cells. Victor said nothing, just sat on the bunk staring at the floor. After Hawkins left to organize the meeting, Silas and Jacob stood alone in the outer office. The silence between them was heavy with 14 years of unspoken words. I didn't know, Jacob said finally, about your sister, about Blackwell threatening her. I should have told you, should have trusted you. But I was scared, Jake. 20 years old and scared out of my mind. Blackwell showed me a picture of her, told me where she lived, where she went to school, who her friends were. Said it would look like an accident if anything happened to her. So you took his money and stayed quiet. I took his money, and I've been taking it ever since. Every few years he'd pay me to forget things, to lose evidence, to make sure certain truths stayed buried. And I told myself I was protecting Sarah, that I was doing it for her. But she died anyway. Cancer last year. Nothing Blackwell did or didn't do, just bad luck. And when she was gone, I realized I'd sold my soul for nothing. Betrayed my friends for a sister who never knew she was in danger, who lived her whole life innocent while I carried the weight of what I'd done. Silas met Jacob's eyes. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know I'm sorry. For Thomas, for Amira, for every lie I told and every truth I buried. And if I can make even a small piece of it right by bringing down Blackwell, then maybe I can die knowing I wasn't completely worthless. Jacob was quiet for a long time. Outside, the town was buzzing with preparation. Inside, two old soldiers faced each other across a divide built from betrayal and guilt. Thomas used to say something, Jacob said finally. He'd say the measure of a man isn't his mistakes. It's whether he tries to fix them. And you're trying, Silas. That has to count for something. Does it? I don't know, but we'll find out. An hour later, St. Michael's Church was packed. Every pew filled, people standing along the walls, pressed shoulder to shoulder. The little wooden church held maybe 120 people normally. Today it held closer to 200. Word had spread beyond Silver Creek. Miners from the surrounding hills, farmers from the valley, even a few Ute Indians who'd come to see what the white men were fighting about this time. Marshal Hawkins stood at the front, looking uncomfortable in the space usually reserved for Father Donnelly's sermons. The priest himself stood to one side, his Irish face creased with concern, but willing to let his church be used for this purpose. Truth, after all, was a holy thing. Abigail sat in the front pew between Jacob and Tom. Silas stood near the door, as if ready to bolt. Victor had been brought from his cell, his wounded hand bandaged, his face the color of old milk. Two deputies stood guard over him. Hawkins called for order. The crowd settled, but the air hummed with anticipation. We're here, Hawkins said, to hear testimony regarding accusations of murder, fraud, and corruption. This isn't a trial, not officially, but what's said here will guide my actions as marshal. And maybe, if we're lucky, we'll find something like justice, he gestured to Abigail. Miss Thornton, you want to speak first? Abigail stood. Jacob saw her hands shaking and reached out to steady her. She looked at him, drew strength from his touch, then walked to the front of the church. For a moment, she just stood there, looking at all the faces. Miners with coal dust still on their faces. Women in plain calico dresses. Children peering between adults. People who worked hard for little pay, who knew what it meant to be cheated by those with more power and money. My name is Abigail Rose Thornton, she said. Her voice was quiet at first, but it grew stronger. 6 months ago, my father died. Captain Marcus Thornton of St. Louis. The authorities said he drowned. An accident. But my father was a ship captain. He knew water the way you know your own children. He wouldn't have drowned by accident. She pulled out the leather envelope. Before he died, my father wrote me a letter. He told me he suspected his brother Victor was stealing from the company. He told me if anything happened to him, I should trust no one except the lawyers whose names he'd given me. And he told me to fight, to never let greedy men take what he'd built. She opened the envelope and held up documents. This is my father's real will. It leaves everything to me. His company, his money, his property, everything. But 3 weeks after his death, my uncle Victor appeared with a different will, one that made him executor, one that gave him control of everything until I married a man of his choosing. That man, she continued, her voice hardening, was Judge Amos Blackwell, a man 30 years my senior, a man I'd never met, a man my uncle said would take care of things once we were married. The crowd murmured. Arranged marriages weren't uncommon, especially among wealthy families. But the age difference and the suspicious timing raised eyebrows. I refused, Abigail said. So my uncle had me declared mentally incompetent. Female hysteria, the doctor called it. Grief-induced insanity. And suddenly I had no rights. No control over my own money or property. No choice about who I would marry. I was told to accept my uncle's decisions or be committed to an asylum for my own protection. Ruth Hennigan called out from the crowd. And you ran? I ran to the only safe place I knew, a convent in New Mexico, Our Lady of Sorrows. The nuns there gave me shelter, but my uncle found me. He hired Silas Cord and others to bring me back. They attacked the convent on December 12th. I escaped into the mountains, and I would have died there if not for Jacob McAllister. Every eye turned to Jacob. He stared straight ahead, his face like carved stone. Mr. McAllister saved my life, Abigail continued. He asked for nothing in return. He risked everything to protect me from men who wanted to silence me. And he did it because it was right, not because it was easy, not because it paid well, because it was right. She held up the papers again. I have proof of everything I've said. My father's real will. Records of money my uncle embezzled. Evidence that Judge Blackwell was paid to expedite legal proceedings. And I've sent copies to 4 different lawyers who have instructions to publish everything if I die or disappear. My uncle will tell you I'm crazy, she said, looking directly at Victor. He'll say I'm confused, emotional, that women can't be trusted to understand business or legal matters. But I ask you to look at the evidence, look at the facts, and decide for yourselves who's telling the truth. She sat down. The church was silent except for the creak of wood and the whisper of breath. Then someone started clapping. Ruth Hennigan. Then another person joined. Then another. Within seconds, half the church was applauding. Not for the drama, for the courage it took to stand in front of strangers and expose your wounds. Victor tried to stand. The deputies pushed him back down. He shouted anyway. She's lying. Judge Blackwell has all the proper papers, legal documentation. She's trying to steal from her own family. Then where's the judge? Ruth called out. If he's got legal papers, why isn't he here defending them? Victor had no answer for that. Marshal Hawkins stepped forward again. Anyone else want to speak? Tom Jr. stood. He looked even younger under the church's high ceiling, a boy playing at being a man, but his voice didn't waver. My name is Thomas Brennan, Jr. My father was Sergeant Thomas Brennan, Union Army. He died at Antietam on September 17, 1862. He died because Captain Amos Blackwell ordered a retreat that left 23 men surrounded by Confederate forces. The crowd went still. The war was 14 years past, but its shadows still touched every family in the territories. Everyone knew someone who had died. Everyone carried scars. My father wrote letters, Tom continued. I have them at home. In the last one, written the night before he died, he said Captain Blackwell was corrupt, that he'd seen evidence of bribery and theft, that he planned to report Blackwell to the commanding general after the battle. Tom's voice cracked, but he pushed through. My father never got the chance. He died the next day, and Blackwell went on to become a general. Then a judge, then a powerful man who nobody questioned. He turned to look at the crowd. But I'm questioning him now. I'm saying my father died trying to expose a traitor. And I won't let that death be for nothing. When Tom sat down, there were tears on many faces. The boy had invoked something sacred, the memory of fallen soldiers, and turned it into an indictment. Silas Cord walked to the front without being called. He carried his leather journal like it weighed 100 pounds. "I need to confess something," he said. The church waited. "I was there at Antietam, same unit as Thomas Brennan and Jacob McAllister. And I knew Captain Blackwell was corrupt. I knew about the bribes, I knew about the deals he was making, and I stayed silent because Blackwell threatened my sister. Said she'd have an accident if I talked." He opened the journal. "But I kept records. Every payment Blackwell made or received. Every order he gave that served his interests instead of the Union. Every man who died because of his decisions. It's all here." Silas looked at Jacob, including Amira, the woman in Afghanistan. "Blackwell arranged for our unit to abandon that village because he'd been paid by a contractor who wanted the land. That woman died begging for help, and we walked away because our captain had been bought." The church erupted, people shouting questions, demanding answers. Hawkins had to call for order 3 times before the crowd settled. An old woman in the back stood up. "Where is Judge Blackwell? Why isn't he here to defend himself?" "He ran," Jacob said, standing. His voice cut through the noise like a blade. "Last night, when he realized the truth was coming out, he ran into the mountains like the coward he is." "And we should find him," Zeke said, struggling to his feet. "Bring him back, make him face what he's done." But Jacob shook his head. "The mountains will judge him better than we can. It's winter. He's not dressed for survival. If he makes it out, then maybe he deserves to. If he doesn't, then that's God's justice." The crowd considered this. It had a biblical feel to it, letting the wilderness be the judge. Old Testament justice. Marshal Hawkins cleared his throat. "I've heard enough. Victor Thornton, you're under arrest for fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit murder. I'm holding you for the territorial circuit judge. And when Blackwell is found, he'll face charges of treason, corruption, and murder." He turned to Abigail. "Miss Thornton, I'm declaring your uncle's guardianship null and void. You're a free woman. Your property is yours, and you have my word that no one will force you into marriage or silence you again." The crowd erupted in cheers. People stood, clapping, shouting approval. Abigail sat down hard, as if her strings had been cut. Jacob moved to her side, ready to catch her if she fell. She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "It's over," she said. "After 6 months, it's finally over." "Not quite," he said gently. "You still have to rebuild. Take back your company, your life. That's the harder work." "Will you help me?" Jacob considered. The mountains were waiting. His cabin. The silence and solitude he'd built like a fortress around his heart. But when he looked at Abigail, at Tom, at Silas standing there with his journal of sins and salvation, he realized he didn't want the solitude anymore. "Yes," he said, "I'll help." The meeting dissolved into chaos as people crowded around to congratulate Abigail, to hear more details, to offer help. Ruth Hennigan was already talking about organizing a women's group to support Abigail's legal battles. Zeke was discussing witnesses who might testify about Blackwell's corruption. Silver Creek had found its cause, and it wore the face of a young woman who'd refused to be silenced. 6 weeks later, spring was starting to break through winter's grip. The snow in the valleys melted into rushing streams. Green showed in protected hollows. Birds returned from wherever they'd spent the cold months. Abigail Thornton stood in the main room of Jacob's cabin, now expanded with a new addition that served as a schoolroom. Tom Jr. was there, along with 3 other boys from Silver Creek. Orphans and hard cases that nobody else wanted to deal with. Jacob was teaching them to read tracks, to understand the forest, to survive in country that killed the unprepared. But more than that, he was teaching them to be men, to make choices based on conscience rather than fear, to stand up when standing up was hard, to tell the truth even when lies were easier. Abigail watched from the doorway, a smile on her face. She'd won her legal battles. Victor was in prison in Denver, awaiting trial. The company had been returned to her control. She'd sold it to a reputable firm for $65,000, a fortune that would last generations. But she'd kept $20,000. $10,000 went to establishing a fund for war orphans, named after Thomas Brennan. The rest went to building a hospital in Silver Creek and expanding the convent that had sheltered her. And she'd bought the land adjacent to Jacob's cabin, built a small house there, close enough to visit daily, far enough to be proper. They hadn't married, it was too soon for her, too complicated, but they'd reached an understanding. A partnership built on respect and shared purpose. Tom Jr. had stayed, becoming Jacob's apprentice in all ways, learning the mountains, learning himself, growing into the man his father would have wanted him to be. Silas Cord was in Denver testifying before a territorial grand jury about Blackwell's crimes. His journal had proven invaluable. Blackwell himself had never been found. Search parties had looked for weeks before giving up. The general assumption was that he died of exposure somewhere in the high country. His body would appear come summer if the animals left anything to find. Jacob walked over to where Abigail stood. "You planning to watch all day or help teach these boys something useful?" "I was thinking about the future," she said, "about what comes next." "What do you think comes next?" "I think we build something. You teaching these boys. Me running the fund for orphans. Tom growing up strong. All of us making sure that men like Blackwell and Victor can't destroy good people anymore." "That's a lot of work." "I've found I like work, honest work, the kind that matters." She looked up at him. "My father used to say that the purpose of money wasn't to hoard it, it was to build something worth leaving behind, a legacy, and I think we're building that here." Jacob nodded slowly. "Thomas said something similar. Said the best monument a man could have wasn't stone or bronze. It was the people he helped become better versions of themselves. Your friend was wise. He was the best of us." They stood together watching Tom teach one of the younger boys how to identify edible plants. The boy was laughing, engaged, learning, becoming something more than the scared orphan who'd arrived 3 weeks ago. "You know what I realized?" Abigail said. "Running away saved my life. But coming back, standing up, telling the truth, that's what gave me my life back. There's a difference, well, a big difference. And you taught me that. You stood your ground when I wanted to keep running. You showed me that sometimes the bravest thing is to stop and fight." Jacob was quiet for a moment. "I spent 11 years running from what I'd done, from the guilt of losing Thomas, from the shame of following orders instead of conscience. And then you stumbled into my life and gave me a reason to stop running, to stand for something again. So we saved each other." "I guess we did." Tom called out from across the room. "Jake, come show them the thing about moss and direction." "They don't believe me." Jacob smiled, the scar on his face crinkling. "Duty calls. The important work of teaching boys that moss doesn't only grow on the north side of the trees. That's revolutionary knowledge. Someone has to pass it on. Might as well be me." He walked over to the boys. Abigail watched him crouch down, patient and thorough, explaining about moisture and shade, and how to really navigate by the sun and stars rather than relying on folklore. She thought about her father, about how proud he'd be that his money was going to help boys like these, about how his death, as terrible as it was, had set in motion events that brought down a corrupt judge and saved who knew how many future victims. Silver Creek was growing. Word had spread about the town that had stood up to power. People were moving in, good people who wanted to be part of something honest. The mine was producing again under new ownership that paid fair wages. The church was full on Sundays. Roos Mercantile was expanding. And up on the mountain, Jacob McAllister was teaching the next generation how to survive. Not just in the wilderness, but in a world that would test their character at every turn. That evening, after the boys had gone back to town with Tom to spend the night at the boarding house Ruth had opened, Jacob and Abigail sat on the porch watching the sun set behind the western peaks. The air was still cold, but the bite of deep winter was gone. The season was turning. "I had a letter from one of the lawyers," Abigail said. "From Boston. He says the newspapers picked up the story. Judge Blackwell is being investigated. They're looking into every case he ever decided, every verdict he handed down. Years of corruption being exposed." "Good. And Silas's testimony is helping. They've found 2 other soldiers willing to talk about Antietam now that someone else spoke first. The dam is breaking. Silas is a brave man, takes courage to admit you were wrong. Is he coming back here after the trial?" "I don't know. I told him he was welcome. Told him he'd paid his debt by telling the truth. But some men can't forgive themselves even after others have forgiven them." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. An owl called from the forest. Something small died in his talons with barely a sound. Jacob, Abigail said finally, when you found me in that cave, did you know it would lead to all this? No, I thought I was just saving one person from freezing to death. And now? Now I think maybe Thomas was right. He used to say that every choice we make ripples out into the world in ways we can't predict. That the smallest act of kindness or courage might change everything for someone else. And they'd pass it on. And it would grow, and eventually the world would be a little bit better. You believe that? I'm starting to. Abigail reached over and took his hand. He let her. They sat like that as the stars emerged, ancient and indifferent, watching over mountains that had seen countless human dramas play out and would see countless more. But for tonight, in this moment, two people who had saved each other sat together and believed that the future might be worth building. That redemption wasn't just a dream, but a daily practice. That standing your ground when everything told you to run was how you stopped being a coward and started being something more. The mountains were still there. The past was still there. The scars would never fully heal. But Jacob McAllister, who had spent 11 years in exile, had finally found his way home. Not to a place, but to a purpose. And that, in the end, was enough. 3 months later, on a morning when wildflowers dotted the mountain meadows and the air smelled of pine and possibility, a visitor arrived at the cabin. Silas Cord rode up the trail, older looking than when Jacob had last seen him. His beard shot through with more gray. But there was something different about him. A lightness in his bearing. The weight of secrets finally lifted. Jacob was teaching a class of 7 boys now, the original 4 plus 3 more, who'd arrived from various hard circumstances. When he saw Silas, he called a break and walked out to meet him. Silas! Jake! They stood there, 2 old soldiers, 2 men who'd been broken by war and were slowly being rebuilt by peace. Trial's over, Silas said. 3 other officers were indicted. Blackwell in absentia since they still haven't found a body. But his name is ruined, his legacy destroyed, everything he built is ashes. And you? Immunity for testimony. They couldn't touch me legally, but I'm touched anyway. Silas tapped his chest. Here, where it counts. You did the right thing. 14 years too late. Better late than never. Silas dismounted. I came to ask if your offer still stands. About staying here. Helping with the boys. I don't have anywhere else to go. And I figure if I can't earn forgiveness, maybe I can earn usefulness. Jacob considered. It would be complicated having Silas here. The man was a living reminder of everything that had gone wrong. But he was also proof that people could change, that admitting your mistakes was the first step toward fixing them. And the boys needed to see that, needed to understand that being a man wasn't about being perfect. It was about being honest about your imperfections and trying to do better. The offer stands, Jacob said. But you pull your weight. These boys need teachers, not more broken men feeling sorry for themselves. I can do that. And you tell them your story, all of it, the good and the bad. They need to know that heroes aren't born. They're made through hard choices and harder consequences. I can do that too. Tom Jr. appeared in the doorway, saw Silas, and after a moment of hesitation walked over. Mr. Cord, you came back. I did. Your teacher here seems to think I might be useful. Tom looked at Jacob, then back at Silas. My father trusted you once. Jake trusts you now. I guess that's enough for me. He held out his hand. Silas stared at it like it was a miracle, then gripped it firmly. Thank you, son. I'll try to earn that trust. Don't try. Do it. The boy's directness made both men smile. Thomas Brennan's son was growing up to be exactly the kind of man his father would have wanted. That evening, they gathered for dinner at the expanded table that now seated 12. 7 boys ranging from 10 to 16. Tom Jr., Silas, Jacob, and Abigail, who'd taken to joining them for meals and teaching lessons in reading and arithmetic. Before they ate, Jacob asked Tom to say grace. The boy stood, bowed his head, and spoke words his father might have spoken. Lord, thank you for this food. Thank you for this shelter. Thank you for second chances and hard lessons and the courage to keep trying even when we fail. Thank you for the men and women who teach us to be better. And thank you for my father, who I never knew, but who guides me still. Amen. Amen, they echoed. As they ate, the boys arguing about who could identify the most bird calls, who was fastest at starting fires, who'd seen the biggest mountain lion tracks. Jacob looked around the table and felt something he hadn't felt in 14 years. Peace, not the absence of pain, the presence of purpose. He caught Abigail's eye across the table. She smiled at him. That quick, bright smile that said she understood, that she felt it too. Later, after the boys had gone to sleep in the bunkhouse they'd built last month, after Silas had retired to the small cabin he was constructing on the eastern edge of the property, Jacob and Abigail walked through the meadow under stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. "This is working," she said. "What we're building here." "It is. These boys, they're going to grow up different because of you, because you taught them that making mistakes doesn't define you. How you respond to them does. I'm not teaching them anything special, just basic survival. No, you're teaching them how to be men. Real men. The kind who stand up for what's right even when it costs them everything. The kind my father was. The kind Thomas Brennan was. The kind you are." Jacob stopped walking. "I'm not any kind of hero, Abigail. I'm just a man who failed once and got a second chance to do better. That's what makes you a hero. You're human. You failed. You carry a scars, but you didn't quit. You didn't give up. You kept going until you found a way to make things right." She moved closer. "And you taught me to do the same, to stand up, to fight back, to use my voice and my money and my life to make a difference. You would have done that anyway. Maybe, but it would have taken longer. Been harder. You showed me that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite the fear. And that's a lesson worth passing on." They stood in the meadow, the cabin lights glowing warm behind them, the mountain rising dark and eternal above. Somewhere in the forest, a wolf howled. Another answered, the ancient conversation of predators marking territory and calling to their own. "What do you think happened to Blackwell?" Abigail asked. "I think the mountain took him. I think he wandered until he couldn't wander anymore. And I think that's justice enough. You don't wish he'd faced a trial? Been publicly punished?" "I used to, but now I think the worst punishment for a man like that is being forgotten. His name ruined, his legacy destroyed, everything he built erased. That's worse than hanging. And Victor? Your uncle will spend the rest of his life in prison, 20 years minimum, maybe longer. That's justice too." Abigail nodded. "I used to want revenge, wanted to see them suffer, but now I just want to move forward, build something good from what they tried to destroy. That's wisdom. That's survival." They walked back to the cabin slowly, in no hurry to end the evening. At her door, the small house she'd built 50 yards from his, they paused. "Jacob," she said, "I need to ask you something." "Ask. Are you happy, really happy, or are you just making the best of a situation?" He thought about it, gave her the truth she deserved. 6 months ago, I was alone on a mountain, carrying guilt like stones in my pockets, waiting to die because I'd lost the will to live. Now I've got 7 boys learning to be men. I've got Silas learning to forgive himself. I've got Tom becoming his father's son. And I've got you." He paused. "So yes, I'm happy. Not in the way I would have defined it at 20, but in a way that matters more. I'm useful. I'm needed. I'm making a difference. That's enough." "Just enough or more than enough?" "More than I deserve." "No," she said firmly, "exactly what you deserve. Exactly what you earned by choosing to save a stranger instead of leaving her to die." She stood on her toes and kissed his cheek, quick and light. "Thank you, Jacob McAllister, for everything." Then she was inside, the door closing, leaving him standing in the starlight with the ghost of her kiss on his face and something like hope in his heart. He walked back to his own cabin, to the room where he slept now, without nightmares, where Thomas's voice no longer accused him in the dark. Tomorrow he'd teach the boys about reading weather patterns, about predicting storms, about preparing for what you couldn't prevent. But tonight he allowed himself to believe that the worst storms of his life had passed. That redemption wasn't a destination, but a journey. that every day he woke up and chose to do better, to be better, was another step away from the man who'd let Thomas die and toward the man Thomas had believed he could be. The mountains stood eternal. The stars wheeled overhead. The world kept turning. And Jacob McAllister, once known as Iron Jake, the soldier who'd failed his friend and fled to exile, had finally found what he'd been looking for without knowing he was searching. Not forgiveness from others. That had been given freely by everyone who mattered, but forgiveness from himself. And that, in the end, was the only kind that truly counted. The story of the mountain man and the woman he saved became legend in Silver Creek and beyond. Newspapers picked it up. Dime novels fictionalized it. People told versions around fires and dinner tables, the details changing with each telling. But the truth was simpler and more profound than any legend. A man who'd run from his failures learned to stand his ground. A woman who'd been silenced found her voice. A boy without a father found men willing to teach him what fathers should. And a collection of outcasts and orphans became a family bound not by blood, but by choice and commitment and the shared understanding that second chances were precious gifts, not to be wasted. Years later, when historians looked back at the corruption scandals that shook Colorado territory in the 1870s, they would note that it all began with one anonymous tip. One woman's courage to speak truth to power. One marshal who chose justice over politics. But those who were there knew it really began on a frozen mountainside when a man who'd spent 11 years running from his past decided to finally stop and face it. And in facing it, in choosing courage over comfort, Jacob McAllister didn't just save Abigail Thornton. He saved himself. The end.